All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move into our first panel, our breakfast session panel this morning, which is discussing the impact of COVID on the Australian hotel industry, reflections and predictions. Our moderator this morning is the lovely Dora from Baker McKenzie, and our panellists are Abhijay, Graeme, David and Leanne. Come on up.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you've all had a lovely night and that you've all been enjoying AHICE as much as I have. It's pretty hard to believe there's so many people I haven't seen in 2 years, so it's been a great reunion. My name's Dora Stilianos and I'm a partner of Baker McKenzie in the real estate group, specialising in hotel management agreements and hotel developments. Over the last 5 years in particular, I've been privileged to work on an array of exciting hotel projects in my hometown of Melbourne, and it's been great seeing some of those come to completion in the last year, and some of which are due to complete this year, including our IHG Voco Lonsdale. Very exciting, Abhijay. So I'm particularly excited to be interviewing our panel today here and learning about their insights into what we've learnt from COVID and moving forward, how we're going to progress into the future. So I'd love to introduce our panel. Abhijay needs very little introduction. Abhijay from IHG joined or was appointed his current role in late 2019 as Vice President of Development Japan, Australasia and Pacific. How's that for timing, Abhijay? Quite a time to take on that role at the end of 2019. But yet somehow during this period of time, we've seen Voco and Hotel Indigo continue to grow, and very exciting congratulations on the announcement for Kimpton. We're so thrilled.
Thanks, Dora. No, it's been an exciting phase for us at AHG, but helped and blessed by some of our owners and partners in this room.
Also on the panel today, we've got my partner, Graeme Dickson. Graeme's partner in our Sydney office and global coordinator of our leading hotel resorts and tourism group. He's also the guru of all things hotel management agreements, and we really look forward to hearing his insights into current deals today. David Simpson, Managing Director of AXIA, has held extensive management roles in Starwood, advising on finance, acquisitions, development and governance. And he very ably provides consulting advice on all things hotel management agreements, and we welcome you today and look forward to hearing your insights, David.
Thanks, Dora.
And joining me on the left here, we've got Leanne Meyer. Leanne's an investment manager for Omni Bridgeway. If you haven't heard of Omni Bridgeway, they offer finance for dispute litigation from case inception all the way through to judgment enforcement. So Leanne, we're really looking forward to hearing from you today and your insights on what you're seeing from a litigation and insurance claims perspective in the hotel industry as a result of COVID. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Abhijay, might start with you. Try to find some energy. I know you're running on little steam, but you're looking very fine this morning. You've done very well to scrub up and turn up on time, so thank you. Looking back 2019, aside from learning how to pivot and resisting the urge to end every email with "stay safe," looking back, what was the hardest thing to deal with in 2019?
Thanks, Dora. I'm actually on full steam. Don't let the rumors dissuade you or let you believe otherwise. I think that's the magical part about this industry. We, apart from fellow attendees who I can't see many of which in the room this morning, but nonetheless, we'll kick off. So 2020, yes, I mean, we've gone through that in the last couple of days of, it is the most challenging period everyone in the industry has ever seen, and hopefully we won't see something like this in our lifetimes again. It's as we've all said in the last couple of days, to solve the medical problem, you need to do everything that our industry needs to survive, as in travel and get together, and we're blessed in Australia to be able to do this. So most challenging period, I'd say, I'm trying to cast my mind back to March 2020, when we sort of were digesting what was happening in China and what was happening in other markets, where hotels were starting to close down in China, and we were starting to report through our being listed through our channels and guidance to the analysts on what was happening with closures. At no point did we fathom that would be possible to happen in Australia. So I think the biggest challenge for us was grappling with the unforecastable, or grappling and dealing with things that we could never imagine, i.e. shutting a whole industry down, stopping airports. This is what we've seen in the last 14 months. No one would scenario plan for, very few could scenario plan for, and the cost of scenario planning in that environment is quite high. So you just don't forecast for these sort of situations. And I think that's probably, you were always blindsided by all the things that 2020 threw at us. And I think 2021 coming in hindsight, I mean, we can deal with pandemics. We've got some sanitizer, we've got social distancing, we've got other ways to deal with it. And as an industry, I think we've come out much more resilient, much stronger. But in summary, the people aspect of all of that, while we're being constantly blindsided by changes in travel, changes in other restrictions, the people aspect was definitely the most challenging, as we had to stand down colleagues in our hotels and our corporate offices because of the lack of demand. It was probably the most impactful part of 2020.
Yeah, I think that's certainly been a resounding comment that's come through yesterday as well. Certainly the impact on our people, and I certainly feel for those of you in management positions who've had to work through that. I can't imagine how challenging that would have been. So looking back then, thinking about hotel shutdowns and the speed with which you needed to make those decisions, I'm wondering about, looking forward as to what we do in terms of making decisions in that space. So David, I was wondering, over this time you've been helping your clients navigate their way through surviving a pandemic. In terms of hotel shutdowns, looking forward, what do you think? What are the determining factors for hotel operators and owners in deciding whether or not to shut down their hotel? At what point will that decision be being made, do you think, going forward in Australia?
Yeah, look, it was a really difficult time, and when we were first hit with this, we had to make a lot of assumptions because we really didn't know how big the problem was going to be and how long it was going to last. The determining factors were really, primarily financial. So, we work with operators to come up with financial projections under various scenarios to try and work out, what was the quantum of the gap between closing a hotel, keeping it open, and so on. We had to think about the impact on staff, the impact on customers, impact on reputation for the hotel. And it was very much a collaborative decision. In the projects we worked on, there were hotel management agreements, and you have to respect the rights of both parties under that agreement. This impacted operators significantly as well. But I think the operators we work with realised the potential impact for the owner was significantly greater. And when we ran those scenarios, we found that they were very supportive towards the owner's position. A couple of different scenarios we faced. One was a hotel where we felt it was probably that the gap between closing the hotel and keeping it open was quite big, and we were actually very close to making the decision with the operator to close the hotel for a period. what happens then when you're trying to ramp up again was a real concern for us. And then we ended up not having to make the decision because the operator was able to secure a quarantine contract. And then we had a whole lot of discussion around, in that environment, what's the risk to reputation? You know, in that scenario, we had a very seasoned general manager and we felt really comfortable that they were going to be able to manage it. The government had offered security services, which we found out later were flawed, but they offered security services, external security services, and we felt that the risk was mitigated to the extent that it was worth taking and the financial impact was quite great. And the owner, you know, had obligations to their bank to do the right thing. In another scenario, you know, with a resort, we actually did the analysis and thought the gap wasn't as great in opening versus closing, and mainly because grounds and landscaping, rates and taxes and all of those costs that continue when you're closed made the decision to stay open a bit easier from a financial perspective, and then from a staffing perspective we felt it was better to keep the operation running. You know, was this going to be a 1 month thing, 2 months thing, 3 months thing? And we were really concerned about when it's over, how quickly can we ramp up? And if the hotel's shut and the staff are gone, it's going to be difficult.
That's a good lead-in into hotel quarantine. We've obviously talked about that significantly over the last couple of days. And hotel quarantine, obviously for hotel owners and operators, has had the benefit of a guaranteed income for that period of time. So you've got that that benefit. But at the Abjay, I'm just thinking, you know, earlier in the year, earlier in the piece, did you contemplate not participating in the hotel quarantine program? What kind of processes did IHG go through in making that decision?
Yeah, it's not, I mean, absolutely, Dora, it was not an easy decision, right? So we've got quarantine ports in most of our major cities across Australia and in New Zealand. I think primarily the principal motivation, as David sort of alluded to, is yes, you have responsibilities to banks, you have debt service, everyone's got bills to pay in reality. So you have a large amount of staff in these hotels that we had to, you know, the right thing to do is to try and keep them in jobs. And I think that's really the primary motivation. No one's really making, as Simon said yesterday on one of his panels, no one's breaking the bank or making significant money on this business. It was the primary motivation is we've got empty hotel rooms. It's logical to do our bit for society and have returning Australians have a place to quarantine. So the industry stepped up. Sadly, the media didn't step up to that extent. And what we need to remember is all these quarantine programs actually run, as everyone in this room knows, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but the quarantine programs are run by the government bodies, whether it's Department of Justice in Melbourne or in WA, a slightly different variation of that. And the hotel teams are essentially directed by them. So no one wants to have a COVID cluster named after them. Sadly, the Holiday Inn at Melbourne Airport was let alone Wuhan, had a COVID cluster named after. And the media was even to yesterday was unrelenting, right? We were front page of the Australian. We talk about our brands, and that's where our brands have suffered. While we've stepped up, we've done the right thing for returning Australians to come back and have a safe place to quarantine. So in summary, to answer your question, it was a tough decision to make, but it was the right decision to make because the commercial economics made sense. Plus, there's a vast amount of empty hotel rooms in our cities. So the end benefit and the end game was far more valuable than the short-term risk to brand. And I'm pretty sure the Australian public will look back, you know, a few years later with the benefit of hindsight and saying, you know, these guys did the right thing to bring Australians home, never mind the short-term damage to our brands.
I think it'll be really interesting long-term now what will happen with hotel quarantine. I'd imagine hopefully for our domestic hotel market now things will be on the improve as we, you know, manage to entice our domestic residents to be holidaying within Australia. So therefore then comes the question long term with hotel quarantine. I imagine it will be a different analysis now, and there'll be different financials upon which you'll be determining whether or not to enter into these contracts for hotel quarantine. There's certainly been a lot in the media about what is the long-term solution? Should we be having quarantine stations out in regional areas, etc.? So from Abhijay, from a long-term perspective, what do you think might be the analysis being undertaken by AHICE, but also, what should we be doing in Australia?
I mean, if I were a betting man, it sounds like the virus is not going away anytime soon. So it's likely that quarantine contracts across the industry are going to remain in place for the next 12 to 18 months in some shape or form. Scott Morrison announced that if you're vaccinated Australian and returning back, you could quarantine at home. But we're still in unnatural circumstances of our borders being closed, and I can't remember an instance where any country's borders are closed for as long as our borders have been closed. So I still think it'll be an integral part of the demand segmentation within our cities. Yes, the Holiday Here Tourism Australia campaign has been fantastic, and we're certainly all discovering our own backyards here. But it's not filling our big box hotels in our cities, and I think that's where I think going into the next 12 to 18 months, we'll continue to see that sort of business in our hotels.
Thank you. Leanne, taking a different tact now. So I'm interested to hear from you. From your perspective as a litigator and a litigation funder, what kinds of claims are you seeing from business interruption insurance perspective?
So, unsurprisingly, in the last 12 months, there's been a huge influx of claims by businesses worldwide in many industries, and relevantly and particularly in the hospitality, tourism and travel industry, on business interruption clauses in industrial special risks policies, seeking indemnity and cover for losses of revenue and profit arising out of outbreak of disease and the induced business closures and the losses that have flowed. And as Abhijay alluded to, this industry in particular was blindsided by the events of the last 12 months. And as David said, decisions had to be made very quickly about whether to keep doors open or close doors. And it would be fair to assume in those circumstances, as a business, that there would be insurance coverage to fall back on. What has transpired in response, however, is that many insurers, and this is probably no surprise because the insurers have been fairly vocal and made public statements to this effect. Insurers worldwide have denied coverage under business interruption provisions for a multitude of reasons, but predominantly this one, and that is that many policies include exclusions for losses for quarantinable diseases. And as I said, the insurance industry has been very publicly outspoken about the view they've taken, and as a consequence have also advised brokers have taken heed of the public message and advised clients that coverage is not available as a result of these exclusion policies. Which means obviously that many companies have been denied coverage, or even before it gets to that point have chosen not to make a claim in the belief that there will be an exclusion that will apply and coverage is not available. However, what has in fact transpired, and I'll go into the fact that there are a couple of test cases going through the Australian courts and one in the UK at the moment. What has transpired on closer analysis is that many of these exclusion clauses are in fact ineffective in excluding or allowing insurers to deny coverage. I make the disclaimer that obviously there are many different policy provisions, and the wording of policies, and I think we've currently looked at 300 odd policies. The wording is different in a lot of policies, but in many of the policies there are themes and the intent is the same. So generally speaking, what we are seeing are clauses where coverage has either been denied or businesses have chosen not to make cover on the basis of advice where the exclusions are ineffective. At the moment in New South Wales, the Insurance Council of Australia itself has instigated 2 test cases seeking declarations in favour of, obviously in favour of its members, its association, to the effect that the policy exclusion clauses which seek to exclude claims arising out of public health diseases under the Quarantine Act are in fact effective in excluding cover. The New South Wales Court of Appeal has unanimously decided on the side of the insureds, not the insurers, and the current state of play in Australia is that the courts have said that the exclusion provisions are ineffective in the way the insurers have tried to apply them. That matter is currently on, subject to a special leave application in the High Court. So suffice to say, there's a way to go in reaching some sort of clarity in this area. But the bottom line is, at the moment, the groundswell or the tide of opinion is well in favour of the insureds. There is another test case which is following in the Federal Court, which is yet to be heard, and that will probably be about September. There is a test case which has been concluded in the UK, which also unanimously decided on broader grounds, in fact, in terms of policy interpretation, in favour of the insureds. So,
sorry to cut you off. So I'm hearing from you that we shouldn't be assuming that the insurance companies can rely on the exclusions for our hotel industry to claim on their business interruption insurance policies? Is that
that's
potentially?
Right. Potentially.
With
Now,
all
that's,
the
look,
usual
the
legal caveats.
very clear message is, don't take at face value what the insurance industry is publicly saying is the position. Know your policy, review your policy, and I'd make this point too, that often what we are seeing, and we are looking at commencing various claims or supporting the commencement of various claims for various industry-specific groups, because and it will be the case, I suspect, here, is that industries are covered under the same policy. So many businesses across an industry broadly are going to be covered by and subjected to the same policy wording and provisions. So yes, as Dora said, the message is, regardless of what may have gone before, it is not necessarily the case that exclusion policies that have been said to be effective in denying cover are in fact effective. Yeah.
And are any of these cases in the hotel industry? Any of these test cases at the moment?
So the New South Wales Court of Appeal case, which is waiting to have a special leave application heard in the High Court, relates to it relates to a holiday park operator that had to close their doors, or their gates, I guess. And so, I mean, that is pretty analogous, I would think. And I am aware that there are a number of hotel operators who are seeking advice and looking to make claims in relation to not only the exclusion issue, but the broader sort of wording of policy, the policy provisions.
Thank you. I'm sure you've planted a seed for thought in many in our audience. Taking a little bit of a different tact, and I know Graeme's itching to speak. He's just sitting there thinking, hello. So he's the guru of hotel management agreements. Graeme, over to you. What's happening?
Morning, everybody. Morning, everybody. Since the start of COVID, we have probably negotiated, off the top of my head, around 40 to 50 management contracts, both in Australia and overseas. I've been doing this for probably about 30 years. The level of change that we've seen in that negotiation process since the start of COVID has been far greater than the entire period that preceded it, that I've been doing this sort of work. The thing that COVID has basically brought into even sharper focus than had previously been the case is that these are long-term contracts. In Australia, you'll normally start at about 10 years, and we've seen contracts that go up to 80 years. Those long-term contracts need to deal with uncertainty. And boy, have we seen uncertainty in the last little while. And that uncertainty needs to factor into the negotiation process. And it has effectively made the negotiations far more intricate. I won't go into all the areas that it is involved, but things like for hotels under construction, what are the parameters under which the obligations to construct need to be determined? What are the uncertainties if, for whatever reason, something comes out of the woodwork from either a financing angle or some other angle which prevent the developer from being able to proceed in the way that they initially contemplated proceeding at the time they were negotiating the contract? Debt. Will the people that hotel owners are able to borrow from over the life of the management contract be the same group of people that they've traditionally borrowed from for a long, long time, major trading banks? And if it's a different source of lender, what are the requirements that those lenders are going to have? And how do you build the flexibility that those lenders may well be seeking to impose into the contract? Assignment provisions. And probably lastly, for the purpose of this morning, there's a far greater recognition now that there needs to be a central link between the concepts in a hotel management contract and the desire to maximise the sale value of the hotel, whether that be in 2 years' time, 10 years' time, or 15 years' time. There needs to be a fundamental causal link between the drivers in the management contract and the sale process to ultimately realise the highest sale value for the hotel in, as what I've said, an increasingly uncertain world. Thank you.
We've certainly had to look at a lot of the provisions of our hotel management agreements with a different filter in this environment. So they've certainly made for some interesting negotiations over the last year in particular. David, we've spoken extensively about your views on franchising. Would you like to tell us about what you think the future has to come in that space in respect to hotel management agreements?
Sure. I think, when you get a situation like this and you end up with a lot of hotels under management agreements and you're relying on the operator to deal with all of those hotels, what they have to focus on is solutions that can be rolled out across a whole system. And I think it sort of raises the issue again of how much involvement an owner can have. And in this case, the owner has to have a lot of involvement. But under a franchise agreement, the owner is in direct control. And our view is that under a franchise agreement, you still get access to all the strength of the brand, which is really important, the distribution systems, all the things I mentioned yesterday. But you're able to take a bespoke approach to your own hotel. So, our view is that franchising has been so prolific in other countries, primarily the US. There's different operating regime there. And it's been slow to take off here. It's not particularly well understood. There's issues around it, cost and, other issues. But we think now more than ever it's time to really look at that.
Graeme, I've heard you throw around this term manchise. What are you talking about? What is that?
Manchise, sadly, is only a term in Australia. It's not a concept or an operating reality. It's basically designed to deal with a situation where you have a new owner who basically is going into the hotel industry for the first time, and basically at the start of that process needs the maximum assistance from the management company. So effectively the document they entered into is something which is akin to a standard hotel management agreement. But the document then has provisions which at a point in time, typically when the hotel stabilises 2, 3, 4 years after it opens, when the owner feels more comfortable about the operations and can therefore trigger a conversion of the arrangement with the operator from a management arrangement to a franchise arrangement. It has two fundamental consequences. One is it gives the owner greater control over the day-to-day operations of the hotel and generally reduces the fees that it will otherwise be paid because the management company doesn't have the same level of involvement. As I say, it's a concept. I've only ever seen one initiated in Australia, and under that agreement, the owner didn't trigger the option to convert to a franchise. And I don't quite know why it isn't more popular than it is at the moment.
Thank you. Turning now to developments and what's going on. So Abhijay, like I said, congratulations. Lots of new announcements, exciting things happening. As a Melburnian, I'm happy to hear about your plans for the Conti Sorrento. Many a time we've not been able to secure a restaurant or accommodation down the Mornington Peninsula with a cast of thousands, particularly this year. So that's one that I'm excited about. Interested to hear from you about, what's the outlook for IHG and new development projects going forward for this year and beyond.
Thanks, Dora. Yes, the Continental Hotel in Sorrento is a great win for us. It's an adaptive reuse, as most of you may know, of a 145-year-old heritage building. The future, at least the next sort of 3 years, which is what we can forecast for, we believe is going to be conversion heavy, and last year was a good example of that. We typically sign 20% of our deals as conversions in the Japan, Australasia, Pacific region, which I look after. And last year we were at 80, so we flipped that balance, largely driven by a few large resorts in the Pacific Islands. But we're starting to see a lot of that come through. Yesterday's announcement of the Kimpton in Sydney, a good example of an adaptive reuse or conversion from unbranded hotels to sort of internationally branded hotels. So we saw this at the back of the GFC between 11 and 14. A lot of the growth came from conversions of unbranded or domestically branded hotels to international brands because the need to tap into wider global systems.
And have you seen, as part of your design of new hotels, have you seen any changes that have flowed on from COVID? I know we talk about the new people going on workcations, and it was interesting to hear Sebastian Bazan yesterday talking about he was foolish to not have tacked on a couple of days of extra stay when he travelled for work, which is certainly something I'd like to do. And now we can all work from anywhere. So has that impacted at all your plans on design for hotels going forward?
The hotel industry is one of the oldest industries in the world. I mean, it goes back to a few millennia ago. So I think in essence, the core room product, while we're seeing rooms getting smaller, but that's sort of not really a COVID outcome, won't change substantially. What we're seeing is tech being integrated into far greater manner. The fact that Sebastian was in this room and felt like he was very much alive with us in Adelaide was a great example of what we're going to see. So hybrid tech is going to just become commonplace and table stake across hotels. And I think continuously it'll be a tech-driven change rather than whole-scale design changes and different ways of pouring concrete or something like that. I can't see that happening.
just related to development, obviously, is the issue of funding. We've spoken extensively about funding. Michael Simpson yesterday was talking about that the market's now dominated by US private equity coming in. David, what are you seeing from a funding perspective?
Yeah, we had a couple of projects that had term sheet from a Big Four bank, where the term sheet was withdrawn, the requirements of the bank changed, and they said, well, we no longer meet that. So we went back to market. In both cases, we got a new term sheet from another major bank, but we also got term sheet from non-bank lenders. And what we saw was from the major banks, like Stephen Burt was talking yesterday, the LVR was significantly lower on the back of a lower valuation, because as if complete valuations in a COVID-impacted environment were significantly reduced. So, you know, with the lower LVR, it meant that the owner had to top up with mezzanine funding, which is a higher cost, or go to a non-bank lender where the cost is higher, but the LVR is also higher. And we saw that really impacting equity returns, which we think is why the development supply pipeline is really drying up very quickly. Not only inability to get debt, but owners saying, I'm now not getting my equity return, I'm not going to proceed. So, you know, our view is in 2023, 24, we're probably going to be back in a situation where we're saying we need more supply in the market.
I'm getting the wrap up, so Abhijay, I'll give you the last word. Any key predictions, key takeaways for the year ahead?
Well, I think the big takeaway, and Sebastian alluded to this yesterday, was we're an industry that's resilient. We're going to come back, and we're going to come back stronger at the back of COVID. So, and this is a great example of the future. So, yeah, and it's great to be back on the road.
Thank you for listening. Thanks for turning up.